The sun hung low over the jagged peaks of the Sierra Nevada, painting the vast grasslands below in shades of gold and crimson. The year was 1876, and the small settlement of Cedar Ridge sat like a lonely outpost at the edge of civilization, where the last vestiges of order met the untamed wilderness of the American frontier. Sarah Bennett stood at the edge of her family's modest homestead, shading her eyes against the dying light. At 19, she possessed the kind of quiet beauty that came from hard work and simple living, sun-kissed skin, calloused hands, and eyes the color of prairie sky after a storm. Her father had brought the family west 5 years prior, chasing dreams of prosperity that had yet to materialize. Instead, they found themselves scratching out a meager existence from the unforgiving soil, always one bad harvest away from ruin. The settlement itself was a collection of weathered buildings huddled together against the vastness of the landscape. Main Street, if one could call the dusty tract that, boasted a general store, a saloon, a church with a crooked steeple, and a handful of other establishments that served the needs of the scattered homesteaders and occasional travelers. It was a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where judgment came swift and mercy was often in short supply. Sarah had just finished feeding the chickens when she heard the thunder of hooves. A wild mustang, black as midnight with a white blaze down its face, came charging across the meadow. She froze, knowing that any sudden movement might spook the animal into trampling her. The horse's eyes rolled white with panic, foam flecking its mouth as it bore down on her position. In that moment of certain danger, a figure appeared from the tree line, moving with the fluid grace of one born to the wilderness. He was tall and lean, dressed in buckskin and worn boots, his long dark hair bound back with a leather cord. His face bore the unmistakable features of the Modoc people, high cheekbones and skin bronzed by countless days under the open sky. Without hesitation, he stepped between Sarah and the charging horse, raising his arms and making a low, soothing sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest. The mustang reared up, its hooves pawing the air mere feet from where they stood. But the man held his ground, continuing his gentle murmur until the animal's panic began to subside. Gradually, the horse lowered its head, sides heaving with exertion. The stranger reached out slowly, letting the mustang catch his scent before placing a steadying hand on its neck. "You're safe now," he said quietly, and Sarah wasn't sure if he was addressing her or the horse. His English carried the slight accent of one who had learned it as a second tongue. "Thank you," Sarah managed, her heart still racing from the near miss. "I thought for certain—" He turned to look at her then, and she found herself caught by eyes as dark and deep as mountain pools. Wild things fear what they don't understand. Best to show them there's nothing to fear. The mustang, now calm, wandered off to graze at the edge of the meadow. Sarah knew she should go back to the house. Her mother would be wondering where she'd gotten to. But something held her in place. "I'm Sarah Bennett," she said, surprising herself with the boldness of the introduction. Young women in Cedar Ridge didn't speak to strange men, especially not Indian men. But there was something about this moment, suspended between danger and safety, that made the usual rules seem distant and unimportant. "They call me Joseph," he replied, inclining his head slightly. "Joseph Winnemucca. My people camp in the mountains during summer months." Sarah had heard of the Modoc camps, though the townspeople spoke of them in hushed, suspicious tones. They were said to be a proud people, skilled hunters and horsemen who had managed to maintain their traditional ways despite increasing pressure from white settlers. "I should thank you properly," Sarah said. Would you like some water? Or food? My mother always has something cooking." A ghost of a smile crossed Joseph's face. "Your kindness honors me, but I think your people would not welcome a Modoc at their table." The truth of his words stung, but Sarah couldn't deny them. She'd heard the talk in town, the casual hatred that spilled from lips in the general store and after church services. Indians were thieves. They said, savages, not to be trusted. "Then perhaps just the water," she said, not ready to let this strange encounter end. "There's a stream just beyond those cottonwoods. It's on our property, but—" This time his smile was fuller. warming his features. "I know the stream. My grandfather showed it to me when I was a boy, before your people came to this valley." There was no accusation in his tone, just a statement of fact. But Sarah felt the weight of history between them. She led the way to the stream, aware of him moving silently behind her, his footsteps barely disturbing the grass. At the water's edge, he knelt and cupped his hands, drinking deeply. Sarah sat on a fallen log, smoothing her worn calico dress over her knees. The evening air was cooling, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. "Do you often come this way?" she asked. "Sometimes. The deer trails lead through this valley." He settled back on his heels, watching the water flow. "But I'll find another path if my presence troubles you." "No," Sarah said quickly, then blushed at her eagerness. "I mean, you saved me from that horse. The least I can do is share the stream." They talked as the shadows lengthened, careful conversations that skirted around the divide between their worlds. Joseph spoke of the mountains, of hidden valleys where the snow melt fed crystal pools, of the old ways his people fought to preserve. Sarah told him of her family's struggles, her young brother Thomas, who was often sick, her father's stubborn determination to make the homestead prosper. When the first stars began to appear, Sarah knew she had to go. "My mother will be beside herself," she said, standing reluctantly. Joseph rose as well, and for a moment they stood facing each other in the gathering dusk. "The Mustang may return," he said. "They often follow the same paths, if you find yourself in danger again." "Will you be here?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. His dark eyes studied her face. "The stream is a good place to water horses. Many travelers stop here." It wasn't quite a promise, but it wasn't a refusal either. Sarah nodded, understanding the careful line they were walking. "Then perhaps I'll see you again. Joseph Winnemucca. Perhaps you will. Sarah Bennett." She turned and hurried back toward the homestead, where lamplight was already glowing in the windows. Behind her, she didn't see Joseph remain by the stream for a long while, his gaze following her path until she disappeared into the gathering darkness. Over the following weeks, Sarah found reasons to visit the stream. Sometimes she brought mending to work on by the water. Other times she carried a book, though she found herself reading the same pages over and over, her attention wandering to every sound from the forest. Joseph appeared as silently as he had that first day, and gradually their careful conversations grew longer. He taught her to recognize the calls of different birds, to read the signs of coming weather in the clouds. She shared the books she loved, reading aloud passages from Whitman and Thoreau while he listened with quiet intensity. They never spoke of what was growing between them, the connection that defied every boundary their worlds had erected. But it was there in the way their hands almost touched when she passed him a cup of water, in the way his face softened when she laughed, in the way her heart raced when she caught sight of him emerging from the trees. It was a secret as fragile as morning frost, as dangerous as the wild mustangs that roamed the valley, and like all secrets in a small town, it couldn't last. The whispers started at Henderson's general store on a Tuesday morning. Martha Henderson, the proprietor's wife, had seen Sarah walking near the cottonwoods at dusk. "And she wasn't alone," she added with meaningful emphasis to her eager audience of townswomen gathered around the pickle barrel. By noon, the story had grown wings. Sarah Bennett had been seen with an Indian. Not just any Indian, but one of those Modoc men who lurked in the mountains. By the time the sun set, half of Cedar Ridge was convinced they knew exactly what kind of shameful conduct was taking place by the stream. Sarah first sensed the change when she entered the store to buy flour. Conversations ceased mid-sentence. Mrs. Henderson, who had always greeted her warmly, busied herself with arranging canned goods and wouldn't meet her eyes. The other women, Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Clark, and old widow Morrison, stood in a tight cluster, their face pinched with disapproval. "Good morning," Sarah offered tentatively. The response was a chorus of sniffs and turned backs. Only widow Morrison acknowledged her, fixing her with a stare that could have curdled fresh milk. "Some folks have no shame," the old woman muttered, loud enough to carry across the store. Sarah's cheeks burned as she quickly made her purchase and fled. Outside, she nearly collided with Reverend Blackwood, his thin face grave beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Miss Bennet," he said, catching her elbow. "A word, if you please." She wanted to refuse, to run home and hide from the judgment in his pale eyes, but his grip was surprisingly firm for such a gaunt man. He steered her toward the church, speaking in low, urgent tones. "There have been concerns raised about your conduct. Child, tales of meetings with one of those heathen savages." He spoke the last word as if it tasted bitter on his tongue. "Surely these are merely malicious rumors?" Sarah lifted her chin, finding a spark of defiance. "I've done nothing wrong. Reverend, a man helped me when I was in danger, and I've spoken with him on occasion. Where is the sin in that?" The minister's face darkened. "Where is the sin? Child, you dare ask such a question? These people are not like us. They are without God, without civilization. To consort with them is to invite corruption of both body and soul." "He saved my life," Sarah said quietly. "Surely that shows godliness." Reverend Blackwood released her arm as if she had burned him. "I will pray for your soul, Sarah Bennet, and I suggest you do the same, before it's too late." At home, the confrontation she'd been dreading was waiting. Her father sat at the rough-hewn table, his weathered hands clenched into fists. Her mother stood by the stove, tears streaming down her face. Even young Thomas, usually bouncing with energy despite his frequent illnesses, sat silent in the corner. "Is it true?" Her father's voice was deadly quiet. "Have you been meeting with one of them?" Sarah wanted to lie, but the words wouldn't come. "His name is Joseph. He's kind and educated, and—" The slam of her father's fist on the table cut her short. "I don't care if his name is President Grant himself. No daughter of mine will disgrace this family by taking up with an Indian." "William, please," her mother interjected weakly. "Quiet, Mary." He stood, looming over Sarah. "Do you have any idea what you've done? What people are saying? I can barely show my face in town. Henderson's talking about cutting off our credit. The Pattersons won't buy our eggs anymore. You've ruined us." "I've done nothing but talk to him," Sarah protested. "Since when is conversation a crime?" "Since you started doing it with one of them," her father spat. "It ends now. Girl, you'll not leave this homestead except for church, and maybe not even then if I can't trust you to behave with decency." "That's not fair." "Fair?" Her father's laugh was harsh. "What's not fair is having a daughter who doesn't care about her family's reputation. What's not fair is watching everything I've worked for crumble because you can't keep away from some savage." Sarah fled to the small room she shared with Thomas, throwing herself on the narrow bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear her parents arguing, her mother's pleas for understanding met with her father's unyielding anger. Later, Thomas crept in, his small face worried. "Sarah, are you really friends with an Indian?" She wiped her eyes and pulled her brother close. "I am. He's a good man, Thomas, no matter what they say. But everyone says Indians are bad, that they steal children and burn houses. Do you remember when you were very sick last winter, and Mother made you that tea from the special bark?" Sarah asked. Thomas nodded. "An Indian woman showed her which bark to use. It saved your life." Thomas considered this seriously. "So, maybe not all Indians are bad?" "No, little one, not all." But the pressure didn't relent. The next Sunday, Reverend Blackwood's sermon was a thinly veiled condemnation of those who would pollute their blood and souls with heathen associations. Sarah sat rigid in the pew, feeling the weight of every glance, every whisper. After the service, a group of men cornered her father outside the church. Sarah recognized Jake Patterson, the wealthy rancher, and several others, including the sheriff's deputy, Carl Morrison. "Bennett," Patterson said, his voice carrying clearly, "we need to discuss your daughter problem." "I'm handling it," her father replied stiffly. "Are you?" Morrison stepped forward, tobacco juice staining his beard. "Because from where we stand, looks like that girl of yours is still running wild. Some of the boys saw her heading toward the stream just yesterday. Sarah's blood ran cold. She had only gone to fetch water, but she'd lingered, hoping. This affects all of us. Patterson continued. Indians get the idea that our women are available to them, and we'll have a massacre on our hands. You need to control her, or we will. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Her father's face was gray as he herded his family to their wagon. The ride home was silent except for Thomas's occasional cough, his illness acting up again from the stress. That night, Sarah lay awake listening to the coyotes howl. She thought of Joseph, wondered if he knew about the storm brewing in town. Part of her wanted to warn him to stay away, but a deeper part couldn't bear the thought of never seeing him again. The next morning brought a new crisis. Thomas's cough had worsened overnight, developing into the labored breathing that preceded his worst attacks. Their mother tried every remedy she knew, but nothing helped. "We need the doctor," she said desperately. But when William Bennett rode to town, "Doctor, Hamilton refused to come. I've got paying customers to tend to," he said coldly. "Perhaps your daughter's Indian friend knows some savage cure." It was Sarah who remembered the remedy Joseph had once mentioned, a poultice made from specific plants that grew near the mountain passes. Without telling her parents, she slipped away at dusk, desperation overcoming caution. She found Joseph by the stream, as if he'd been waiting. His face was grave when she explained about Thomas. "I know the plants," he said immediately. "But they grow high in the passes. It's dangerous to go at night." "Please," Sarah begged. "He's just a child. He doesn't deserve to suffer because of me." Joseph studied her face in the fading light. "The town speaks of you with anger. They say cruel things. I don't care what they say. You should care. That kind of anger." He shook his head. "It leads to dark places." But he went with her anyway, guiding her through paths she never could have found alone. They climbed through the darkness, Joseph moving surely despite the treacherous terrain. When they finally found the plants, he showed her how to prepare them, his hands gentle and sure. "Your brother will breathe easier by morning," he promised. As they made their way back down, Sarah stumbled on loose rock. Joseph caught her, and for a moment they stood pressed together in the darkness. She could feel his heartbeat, rapid as her own. "You should leave this place," he said quietly. "Take your family and go somewhere the hatred hasn't poisoned the earth." "I can't. This is our home now, such as it is." "Then we must be more careful. The anger in town, it grows like a wildfire. Soon it will consume everything in its path." He left her at the edge of the homestead, melting back into the night. Sarah hurried inside with the medicine, which worked just as Joseph had promised. By dawn, Thomas was breathing normally again, but someone had seen them on the mountain. Someone had watched and waited and carried the tale back to town like a prize. The reckoning Cedar Ridge had been building toward was about to arrive, and Mercy would not be invited to attend. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Sarah made her way back from the river. A basket of freshly washed clothes balanced on her hip. The path wound through a stand of willows before opening onto the main road back to the homestead. She hummed softly to herself, trying to push away the persistent worry that had settled in her chest since the incident with Thomas's medicine. She never saw them coming. The first indication of danger was the thunder of hooves on hard-packed earth. Sarah looked up to see a group of riders bearing down on her, 8 men, their face grim with purpose. She recognized Jake Patterson at the lead, his expensive hat shadowing his eyes. Beside him rode Carl Morrison, and behind them came others she knew from town. Dan Sullivan, the blacksmith's son, Pete Garrett from the sawmill, the Watson brothers who worked Patterson's ranch. Sarah's basket tumbled to the ground as they surrounded her, their horses kicking up dust that made her eyes water. "Well, well," Patterson drawled, leaning forward in his saddle. "The little Indian lover, all alone." "I need to get home," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "My family is expecting me." "Your family," Morrison spat into the dust. "You forfeited the right to speak of family when you took up with that savage." Sarah tried to step around them, but Sullivan moved his horse to block her path. The animal's eyes rolled nervously, sensing the tension. "We know you were with him again," Patterson continued. "Up on the mountain, in the darkness, like some common woman of the night." "I was getting medicine for my brother," Sarah protested. "He was dying." "So you say." Garrett's voice was ugly with insinuation. "But we all know what really goes on when a white woman sneaks off with an Indian in the dark." The circle of horses pressed closer. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized the full extent of her danger. These weren't just angry townspeople anymore. They were a mob, fed on weeks of rumor and hatred until reason had fled entirely. "What do you want?" she whispered. Patterson smiled coldly. "Justice. You've shamed this entire community, violated the natural order of things. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" "I've done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong?" Morrison laughed harshly. "You've contaminated yourself with one of them, betrayed your own kind. That's about as wrong as it gets." One of the Watson brothers dismounted, producing a length of rope from his saddlebag. Sarah's blood turned to ice. "No," she breathed, backing away only to find Sullivan had also dismounted behind her. "Please, you can't." "Can't we?" Patterson's voice was soft, almost conversational. "You see, Miss Bennett, we've been patient. We've given your father every chance to handle this properly, but clearly, stronger measures are required." They seized her then, rough hands grabbing her arms despite her struggles. Sarah screamed, but they were far from any homestead, and the willows swallowed the sound. Someone, she thought it was Garrett, stuffed a bandana in her mouth to muffle her cries. "There's a place," Morrison said as they bound her wrists. "Out past Miller's Swamp. Quicksand Pool. Indians used to call it the hunger that swallows." Fitting, don't you think? Terror unlike anything Sarah had ever known flooded through her. She'd heard of the Quicksand Pool, a treacherous spot where the ground looked solid but would suck down anything that ventured onto its surface. Animals had been lost there. People, too. If the old stories were true, they threw her across Sullivan's saddle like a sack of grain, and the group set off at a gallop. The ride was a nightmare of jolting pain and growing panic. Sarah tried to work the gag loose, tried to saw at the ropes against the saddle horn, but it was useless. The landscape changed as they rode, becoming marshier, with stands of cattails and the sulphurous smell of stagnant water. Miller's Swamp was a desolate place, shunned by settlers and Indians alike. Even the birds seemed to avoid it, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the squelch of hooves in muddy ground. They stopped at the edge of a clearing. In the center lay what looked like an ordinary patch of sandy ground, perhaps 20 feet across, but Sarah could see the bones of some unfortunate animal at its edge, picked clean by scavengers. The very air seemed to whisper danger. The men hauled her down, standing her at the edge of the deadly pool. Patterson removed her gag, perhaps wanting to hear her beg. "Please," Sarah gasped. "This is murder. You'll hang for this." "Murder?" Patterson shook his head. "We found you nowhere near here. Tragic accident, really. Girl got lost in the swamp, stumbled into quicksand. Happens sometimes to folks who don't know the land." "My family will know. Your family will be grateful we don't run them out of town entirely." Morrison cut her off. "This is mercy, girl. Quick death instead of a lifetime of shame." One of the Watson brothers laughed nervously. "Maybe we should just scare her. Take her back and—" "No!" Patterson's voice cracked like a whip. "We finish this. She's made her choice. Now she pays the price. Show everyone what happens when white women forget their place." They began pushing her forward, step by step toward the innocent-looking sand. Sarah's boots sank slightly with each step, the ground becoming less stable. "Any last words?" Morrison sneered. "Maybe a message for your Indian lover?" Sarah lifted her chin, finding a reserve of courage she didn't know she possessed. "Yes, tell him that love is stronger than your hatred. Tell him—" "Enough!" Patterson shoved her hard. Sarah stumbled forward, her bound hands making it impossible to catch herself. She hit the surface of the quicksand and immediately began to sink. The sensation was horrifying, like being grabbed by countless invisible hands pulling her down. The more she struggled, the faster she sank. The men stood at the safe edge, watching with expressions ranging from satisfaction to unease. Sullivan had gone pale, while the Watson brothers wouldn't meet her eyes, but Patterson and Morrison looked on with grim approval. "Let this be a lesson," Patterson announced, as if addressing a larger audience. "This is what comes of betraying your race, your community, your God." Sarah was up to her waist now, the sand like liquid concrete around her. Tears streamed down her face, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of begging. Instead, she thought of Joseph, his gentle hands teaching her to identify herbs, his quiet voice reading the weather in the clouds, the way his rare smiles transformed his face. "Look at her," Morrison said with disgust. Even now, probably thinking of that savage. The quicksand had reached her chest. Breathing was becoming difficult, each intake of air a struggle against the pressing weight. Some of the men were backing away now, the reality of what they were doing finally penetrating their mob fervor. "Maybe we should," Dan Sullivan started. "We should nothing," Patterson snarled. "We finish what we started. Anyone who wants to leave, go ahead, but know that you're as guilty as she is if you do." No one left, though several looked sick. The Watson brothers had turned away entirely, unable to watch. Even Garrett seemed to be having second thoughts, muttering something about this not being what he'd signed up for. Sarah's vision was starting to blur. The quicksand was at her shoulders now, inexorable in its pull. She thought of her family, her stern father who did love her despite everything, her gentle mother, little Thomas who would wonder why his sister never came home. She thought of the life she might have had, the choices that had led her to this moment, and she thought of Joseph, somewhere in the mountains, not knowing what had become of her. Would he search? Would he understand when she never came to the stream again? The thought of him waiting there, day after day, was almost worse than her own fate. "Shouldn't be long now," Morrison observed with clinical detachment. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to find peace in her final moments. The quicksand was at her neck, each breath a monumental effort. She could hear some of the men muttering prayers, whether for her soul or their own. She couldn't tell. Then, cutting through the oppressive silence of the swamp, came a sound that made everyone freeze, the pounding of hooves, approaching fast. "Who in blazes?" Patterson started, turning toward the sound. A figure burst from the tree line, riding low over his horse's neck, moving with the fluid grace of one born to the saddle. Even through her fading consciousness, Sarah knew who it was. Joseph had come, though how he'd known, how he'd found her, she couldn't imagine. He was riding straight for the quicksand, never slowing. And for a terrifying moment, Sarah thought he meant to plunge in after her. But at the last second, he wheeled his mount aside, leaping from the saddle with a coiled rope in his hands. "Get back, Indian!" Patterson roared, reaching for his gun. But Joseph was already in motion, his movement swift and sure despite the treacherous ground. He'd tied one end of the rope around his waist and was wading into the edge of the quicksand, using a long branch to distribute his weight. "You'll die too, fool!" Morrison shouted. Joseph ignored them all, his dark eyes fixed on Sarah as he fought his way toward her. The quicksand pulled at him, but he knew its ways, knew how to move without triggering its hungry grasp. Behind him, his horse stood firm, the rope taut between them. He reached her just as the sand touched her chin, grabbing her under the arms with strength born of desperation. "Hold on," he commanded. "Don't struggle. Let me do the work." Then, to his horse. "Pull, Wakanda, pull." The horse backed steadily, muscles straining. Joseph held Sarah tight, using his body to shield her from the sand's grip. Inch by agonizing inch, they began to move backward, the quicksand reluctant to release its prey. Patterson had his gun out now, but Sullivan grabbed his arm. "You can't shoot him, not while he's—" "Watch me," Patterson snarled, shaking him off. But before he could aim, a shot rang out from the trees. Morrison's hat flew off his head. and everyone ducked instinctively. More riders emerged from the forest. Modoc warriors, their faces painted for war, rifles trained on the white men. "Drop your weapons," one of them commanded in accented English, "or the next shots won't miss." Faced with superior numbers and firepower, Patterson and his mob had no choice but to comply. Meanwhile, Joseph continued his desperate battle with the quicksand, Sarah's dead weight making every movement a struggle. The rope creaked ominously, but held. Finally, with a wet, sucking sound, the quicksand released its grip. Joseph dragged Sarah onto solid ground, both of them gasping for air. She was covered in sand and mud, her dress ruined, but alive, blessedly, miraculously alive. Joseph cut her bonds with his knife, pulling her against him as she sobbed into his chest. Around them, the Modoc warriors kept their weapons trained on the would-be murderers, who stood in sullen silence. Their righteous fury evaporated in the face of very real consequences. "You have no right," Patterson finally managed. "This is white man's land, white man's justice." The lead warrior, an older man with silver threading through his braids, smiled coldly. "Justice? Is that what you call throwing a bound woman to her death? Your justice looks much like murder to me." "She betrayed her own kind," Morrison protested. "She loved," Joseph said quietly, still holding Sarah. "If that is betrayal in your world, then your world is sick." He helped Sarah to her feet, keeping a supportive arm around her waist. She was shaking uncontrollably, shock setting in as the reality of her near death penetrated. "We're taking her," Joseph announced. "Any who try to stop us will answer to my brothers." Patterson's face was purple with rage. "You can't just, we can and we will." The older warrior's voice brooked no argument. "You had your chance at justice. Now we'll try ours." They helped Sarah onto Joseph's horse, and he swung up behind her, holding her secure. As they prepared to leave, he looked back at the men who'd tried to murder the woman he loved. "Tell the town what happened here," he said. "Tell them how 8 brave men tried to kill one defenseless woman. Tell them how you stood and watched her sink. And tell them that if they want her, they'll have to go through the Modoc to get her." Then they were riding away, leaving the mob standing impotent by the quicksand pool. Sarah buried her face in Joseph's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart that meant they were both still alive. Behind them, Morrison's voice carried on the swamp air. "This isn't over. Indian, you hear me? This isn't over." But for now, in this moment, it was. Sarah was safe in Joseph's arms, surrounded by warriors who'd risked everything to save a white woman who'd shown kindness to one of their own. The quicksand pool lay empty and waiting, cheated of its meal, while somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried its defiance to the setting sun. The ride to safety was a blur of motion and muted sounds. Sarah clung to Joseph as they navigated the treacherous swamp paths, the Modoc warriors flanking them in protective formation. Her body shook uncontrollably, the delayed shock of her near death making her teeth chatter despite the warmth of the evening. They didn't stop until they reached a sheltered grove miles from the quicksand pool. The older warrior, who Joseph called Uncle Elijah in English, signaled for them to halt. Sarah could barely stand when Joseph helped her down from the horse, her legs buckling beneath her. "Easy," Joseph murmured, supporting her weight. "You're safe now." But safety was a relative concept. Sarah looked around at the armed warriors, at the darkening forest, at the uncertain future stretching before them, and wondered if she would ever truly feel safe again. Uncle Elijah approached, his weathered face grave. "The woman needs rest and care," he said in Modoc, which Sarah had learned enough of to partially understand. "But we cannot take her to our camp. It would bring the soldiers down on our people." Joseph's jaw tightened. "Then where?" "There is a place," one of the younger warriors offered. "The old trapper's cabin by Crystal Falls. It's been abandoned for years." Uncle Elijah considered this, then nodded. "It will do for tonight. Tomorrow, we must think longer." They reached the cabin as full darkness fell. It was a rough structure of logs and mud chinking, but the roof was solid and the walls would keep out the night wind. Joseph carried Sarah inside, laying her gently on a pile of old furs while the others built a fire in the stone hearth. "I need to check you for injuries," Joseph said softly, kneeling beside her. "The quicksand. It can damage more than what shows." Sarah nodded mutely, still struggling to process everything that had happened. Joseph's hands were gentle as he examined her arms and ribs, checking for breaks or serious bruising. Where the ropes had cut into her wrists, angry welts had formed. "These need cleaning," he said, producing a water skin and clean cloth from his pack. As he tended to her wounds, Sarah finally found her voice. "How did you know? How did you find me?" Joseph's face was grim. "Young Tommy Watson came to me. His conscience wouldn't let him stay silent. He ran ahead while his brothers rode with the mob, found me by the stream. I gathered who I could and rode hard. But," his voice caught, "I almost came too late." "But you didn't," Sarah whispered. "You saved me." "We saved you," Joseph corrected, glancing at the warriors who were setting up a watch outside. "My brothers risked much coming here. If the town learns they threaten white men—" Sarah understood the implication. The military would come. There would be retribution, perhaps even massacre. These men had endangered their entire tribe to save her life. Uncle Elijah entered, carrying Sarah's torn and muddied dress. "This cannot be salvaged," he said pragmatically. "Moondove sent these." He produced a bundle of clothing, a doeskin dress and leggings, moccasins, and a warm blanket. "I cannot accept," Sarah began. "You are one of us now," Uncle Elijah interrupted, not unkindly. "The white town has cast you out. To survive, you must become invisible to their eyes." He studied her fair hair critically. "That will need darkening. Walnut juice will do." The full weight of her situation crashed over Sarah. She could never go home, never see her family again. The life she'd known was as dead as she would have been if Joseph hadn't come. "My mother," she whispered. "My father, Thomas, they'll think I'm dead." "Better they think that than know you live with Indians," Uncle Elijah said bluntly. "Your father would be forced to hunt you. Your presence would bring danger to them." Joseph took her hand. "I'm sorry. This is my fault. If I had stayed away, then I would have died inside, slowly, living a life without meaning." Sarah interrupted fiercely. "I chose this. Every meeting, every word between us. I chose it knowing the risk." Uncle Elijah left them alone, and Joseph helped Sarah change into the Modoc clothing. The soft doeskin felt strange against her skin, but it was clean and warm. He showed her how to braid her hair in the Modoc style, his fingers gentle as they worked through the tangles. "Tomorrow we'll darken it," he said, "and create a story. You'll be a captive from back east, rescued years ago, raised by the tribe. Your Modoc is good enough to support it. Will anyone believe it? They'll believe what they need to believe to avoid trouble," Joseph said. "But Sarah, this life will not be easy. My people move constantly, following the seasons and staying ahead of the soldiers. Food is often scarce. Comfort is rare. You're used to a house, a bed, stability." Sarah turned to face him fully. "I'm used to a cage," she said firmly. "A comfortable cage, perhaps, but still a cage. Today, they tried to kill me for the crime of talking to you, of caring for you." "What kind of life is that?" Joseph cupped her face in his hands. "Are you certain? Once we leave here, once you're truly with my people, there's no going back. The white world will be closed to you forever." Sarah thought of the hatred in Patterson's eyes, the casual cruelty of Morrison, the way even the minister had condemned her. Then she thought of Joseph's patience as he taught her about plants, his quiet strength, the way he'd risked everything to pull her from death's grasp. "The white world tried to murder me today," she said. "I choose your world. I choose you." Joseph's eyes blazed with emotion. "Among my people, when a man and woman choose each other, they make promises before the tribe, but we have no tribe here, only my brothers outside. Then we make our promises to each other," Sarah said, "And to the stars, and the earth that nearly claimed me today." They stood together in the flickering firelight, hands clasped, and spoke words of binding in both English and Modoc. It wasn't the church wedding Sarah had once imagined, but it felt more sacred than any ceremony Reverend Blackwood could have performed. A soft whistle from outside interrupted them, the signal for danger. Joseph immediately doused the fire while Sarah huddled in the corner, making herself small. Through the cabin's single window, they could see torches approaching through the trees. Uncle Elijah slipped inside. "Riders from town, 20, maybe more. They're tracking us." "Can we outrun them?" Joseph asked. "Not with the woman. She's too weak from her ordeal." The older man's face was stone. "We make our stand here." "No," Sarah said, struggling to her feet. "I won't have blood spilled for me. Let me go to them. Tell them you were holding me prisoner, that I escaped." "Foolish girl," Uncle Elijah said not unkindly. "They saw us save you. They know you came willingly. Going to them now means death for you and likely war for us." The torches were closer now. Sarah could hear voices. Patterson's carrying over the others. "Spread out. Check every tree, every rock. They can't have gotten far." Joseph strung his bow. His movements economical and deadly. "How many bullets do we have?" "Not enough," Uncle Elijah replied grimly, "but perhaps enough to make them think twice." The other warriors took positions around the cabin, using the trees and rocks as cover. Sarah felt useless, helpless to do anything but watch as these brave men prepared to die for her. Then she remembered something, a detail from the quicksand pool that might buy them time. "Wait," she said urgently. "Some of them didn't want to do it. Sullivan tried to stop Patterson from shooting. The Watson boy ran for help. If they're with the group..." Uncle Elijah's eyes sharpened. Division in their ranks? "Tommy Watson saved my life by warning Joseph," Sarah confirmed. "His brothers looked sick when they pushed me in, and Sullivan actually grabbed Patterson's gun arm. Guilt can be a powerful weapon." Uncle Elijah mused. Perhaps more powerful than bullets. He whispered quick instructions to his warriors, then called out in a voice that carried through the forest, "White men, you seek the woman you tried to murder. Know that she is under our protection now. Any who approach will be met with force." The search party had stopped, clustering together just at the edge of visibility. Patterson's voice rang out. "Send her out, Indian. She's a white woman. She belongs with her own kind." "Her own kind tried to drown her in mud," Joseph shouted back. "What claim do murderers have on anyone?" There was murmuring among the search party. Then another voice. Sarah recognized it as Dan Sullivan. "We just want to know she's safe. If she comes back voluntary-like, no harm will come to her." Uncle Elijah laughed coldly. "The same promise you made before pushing her into quicksand. Your words are worth less than dust." That was a mistake." Sullivan called, and Sarah could hear the anguish in his voice. "Things got out of hand, but if she comes back..." "I will never come back," Sarah shouted, moving to the window so they could hear her clearly. "You tried to murder me. Dan Sullivan, you stood there and watched. Pete Garrett, you helped tie my hands. And you, Jake Patterson, you pushed me in and watched me sink." Her words carried on the night air, and she heard the sharp intake of breath from multiple men. Some of them, she realized, might not have known the full extent of what had happened at the swamp. "Tommy Watson," she continued. "Tommy, I know you're there. Tell them how you ran to warn Joseph. Tell them how your brothers looked when they realized they were part of a murder." There was chaos in the search party now. Voices raised in argument. It sounded like one of the Watson brothers, was shouting about not being party to killing women. Another voice demanded to know what really happened at the swamp. Patterson's roar cut through the discord. "Shut up, all of you. She's lying, trying to divide us." "Am I?" Sarah called. "Then why did 8 armed men need to tie up one woman? Why take me to quicksand instead of the sheriff if I'd committed a crime? Ask them, those of you who weren't there. Ask them what justice looks like when it's drowning a bound woman in mud." The arguments intensified. Sarah could see the torches wavering as men gestured angrily at each other. Then, one by one. Some of the torches began moving away. Not all. Patterson and his core supporters remained, but enough that the odds had shifted. "Cowards!" Patterson screamed at the departing men. "Yellow-bellied cowards!" "No," Dan Sullivan's voice carried back. "Just not murderers. Not anymore." The remaining group was down to perhaps 8 or 10 men. Still dangerous, but no longer the overwhelming force they'd been moments before. Uncle Elijah nodded approvingly at Sarah. "You fight well with words," he said. "Sometimes they cut deeper than arrows." But Patterson wasn't finished. His voice, when it came again, was cold with renewed purpose. "You think you've won something? Mark my words, we'll be back. With the sheriff, with the army if need be. That woman is a traitor to her race, and those who harbor her are enemies of the United States. Every last one of you will hang? Then we'd best not be here when you return," Uncle Elijah said quietly to those inside. The remaining search party lingered for another hour, clearly hoping the fugitives would try to flee and give them clear shots. But eventually, even Patterson had to admit defeat for the night. The torches retreated, voices fading into the distance until only the normal sounds of the forest remained. "They'll make good on the threat," one of the warriors said. "Patterson has connections, money. He'll bring the law. Then we move tonight." Uncle Elijah decided. "North, into the deep mountains. There are caves there, difficult to find, impossible to assault. We can hide until things calm." Joseph turned to Sarah. "Can you ride? It's a hard journey, and you're still weak." Sarah stood, swaying slightly but determined. "I can do whatever needs done. These people," she gestured to the warriors, "they risked everything for me. I won't slow them down." As they prepared to leave, Uncle Elijah pulled Joseph aside. Sarah couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Joseph's face grow grave. Then, determined, he nodded once, firmly, and the older man clasped his shoulder. They mounted up in the darkness, Sarah riding with Joseph, the others spread out in protective formation. As they climbed higher into the mountains, leaving the cabin and the world Sarah had known behind, she wondered what dawn would bring. Would her family mourn her? Would the town believe she was dead or kidnapped? Would they ever stop hunting? But as Joseph's arms tightened around her, as the sure-footed horses picked their way up ancient trails, as the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, Sarah found she didn't care about the answers. She was alive when she should be dead. She was free when she should be caged. She was with the man she loved when the world had tried to tear them apart. The rest, whatever it might bring, would have to wait for tomorrow. Tonight, she was simply Sarah who had been thrown to quicksand for loving an Indian, and Joseph, the Modoc who had risked his life to pull her out. Together, they rode toward an uncertain future, but one they would face side by side. Behind them, the quicksand pool lay silent and hungry, cheated of its prize, and somewhere in Cedar Ridge, Jake Patterson sat in his study, planning revenge while outside his window. A lone coyote howled at the moon, its cry echoing across the valley like a promise of troubles yet to come. The first light of dawn found them high in the mountains, where the air was thin and cold even in summer. Sarah's legs ached from gripping the horse all night, and despite the warm blanket wrapped around her, she shivered in the mountain chill. They had ridden without stopping, pushing the horses hard up treacherous paths that no sensible white man would attempt in darkness. Uncle Elijah called a halt at a small plateau hidden behind a wall of granite. A spring bubbled from the rocks, forming a clear pool before trickling down the mountainside. The horses drank gratefully while the men quickly set up a basic camp. "No fires," Uncle Elijah ordered. "Smoke can be seen for miles in this clear air." Sarah slid from the horse, her legs nearly buckling. Joseph caught her, concern etched on his face. "You need rest. We all need rest," she replied, though she let him guide her to a sheltered spot among the rocks. "But they'll keep coming, won't they?" "Yes," Joseph said simply. There was no point in false comfort. "Patterson won't let this go. His pride is wounded, and wounded pride makes men dangerous. The warriors took turns standing watch, while others caught what sleep they could. Sarah dozed fitfully against Joseph's shoulder, starting awake at every sound. In her dreams, she was sinking again, the quicksand filling her mouth and nose while Patterson's laugh echoed across the swamp. By midday, they were moving again, climbing ever higher into peaks where patches of snow lingered even in late summer. The landscape was harsh but beautiful. Towering pines gave way to scrub brush and, finally, to bare rock and alpine meadows dotted with wildflowers. "My people have used these paths for generations," Joseph told her as they rode. "Before the white men came, we would hunt here in summer, gathering food for winter. Now we use them to hide from soldiers and settlers who want us gone." Sarah heard the sadness in his voice. "I'm sorry. My people, we take and take, never thinking of who was here first. Some think of it." Joseph said, "There was a teacher once, years ago, who came to our village. He wanted to learn our language, our stories. He said knowledge should be preserved, but men like him are rare." They reached the caves Uncle Elijah had spoken of as afternoon shadows grew long. The entrance was hidden behind a fall of rocks, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. Inside, the cave opened into a series of chambers, some natural and some showing signs of ancient human work. "The old ones used this place," Uncle Elijah explained, running his hand over carved symbols on the wall. "Before even the Modoc, it's a sacred site, but also a practical one, defendable, with water and multiple exits if needed." The warriors set about making the cave livable, while Sarah helped where she could. Her soft hands soon blistered from gathering firewood and hauling water, but she didn't complain. These men had risked everything for her. The least she could do was work alongside them. That night, with a small fire finally permitted deep inside the cave where no light would escape, Uncle Elijah called a council. The 5 warriors sat in a circle with Joseph and Sarah, faces grave in the flickering light. "We must speak of the future," the elder began. "The woman cannot stay hidden forever. Already her people search. Soon they'll bring soldiers, claim we kidnapped her. It will mean war." "Let them come," said Red Crow, the youngest warrior, his hand moving to his knife. "We've fought before, and lost much," Uncle Elijah reminded him. "How many of our people died in the last war? How many children grew up without fathers? No, we must be smarter this time." "What do you suggest, Uncle?" Joseph asked. The old man was quiet for a long moment. "She must disappear completely, become someone else. There's a wagon train heading to Oregon Territory in 2 weeks. Mixed group settlers, but also Mexicans, some Chinese workers, even a few half-bloods. If she could join them—" "No," Joseph said immediately. "I won't send her away, and I won't go," Sarah added firmly. "We bound ourselves to each other. Where Joseph goes, I go." Uncle Elijah smiled sadly. "Brave words, little sister. But love doesn't stop bullets or turn aside hatred. Your presence puts every Modoc life at risk." "Then I'll truly become Modoc," Sarah said. "The walnut juice for my hair, yes, but more. Teach me your ways completely. Let me earn my place among you not as a white woman hiding, but as one who chooses your path with her whole heart." The warriors exchanged glances. Such a thing was almost unheard of. A white person fully adopted into the tribe. But these were unusual times, and Sarah had already proven her courage. "There would be tests," Uncle Elijah warned. "Hardships. Our life is not gentle. Neither was drowning in quicksand." Sarah replied, "I'm not afraid of hardship. I'm afraid of losing what I've found. Joseph, yes, but also this." She gestured around the circle. "Men who risked their lives for a stranger because it was right. That's worth any hardship." And so began Sarah's true transformation. The walnut juice darkened her hair to a deep brown, and the sun quickly bronzed her fair skin. But the physical changes were the easiest part. She had to learn to walk differently, to carry herself like someone who had grown up in the mountains rather than on a farm. She had to perfect her Modoc until no trace of English accent remained. The women's work was hardest. Blue feather, One of the warriors' wives, who joined them after a few days, was a strict teacher. Sarah's soft hands bled from scraping hides. Her back ached from gathering and preparing food. Her fingers fumbled with beadwork that Modoc girls learned as children. "You're too gentle," Blue Feather criticized as Sarah struggled to properly clean a rabbit. "This is survival, not needlework. Be efficient." But Sarah persevered, driven by determination and by the knowledge that every skill learned made her less of a burden and more of a contributor. Joseph watched her transformation with a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride in her strength. Sadness for the life she'd been forced to leave behind. A week into their mountain exile, scouts brought troubling news. The search parties had indeed grown larger, and now included a detachment of cavalry from Fort Klamath. Worse, Patterson had put up a reward $500 for Sarah's return, or for information leading to her location. $500 is a fortune to settlers, Uncle Elijah said grimly. Even those sympathetic to us might be tempted. That night, Sarah lay awake listening to the wind howl through the peaks. Joseph lay beside her, their bedrolls closed for warmth in the cold cave. They hadn't been truly alone since the rescue, always surrounded by others, always focused on survival. "Do you regret it?" she whispered into the darkness. "Saving you? Never." His response was immediate. "No, I mean, bringing this trouble to your people, making them fugitives." Joseph was quiet for a moment. "My people were already fugitives, already hunted. You didn't bring trouble, you revealed the trouble that was always there. The hatred that says we're less than human, that our lives matter less than white pride. But now it's worse because of me." He turned to face her, barely visible in the faint moonlight filtering through the cave entrance. "Sarah, listen to me. When Tommy Watson came running to find me, when he told me what they planned, I had a choice. I could have stayed away, kept myself and my people safe. But what kind of life is safety if it means letting injustice win? What kind of man would I be if I let the woman I love die because saving her was dangerous? The others, though, made their own choice. Uncle Elijah could have forbidden it. The warriors could have refused. But they came because it was right. Because sometimes you have to stand up to evil, even when, especially when, it's dangerous." Sarah reached out, finding his face in the darkness, feeling the wetness of tears on his cheeks. "I love you," she whispered. "Whatever comes, that won't change." "Nor my love for you," he replied. "Though love might not be enough to keep us alive, then we'll die together," Sarah said fiercely. "But I don't plan on dying. I plan on living, on proving that their hatred can't destroy what we have." The next morning brought a cold rain that turned to sleet as it hit the rocks. Visibility dropped to mere feet, which was both blessing and curse. The search parties couldn't operate in such weather, but neither could the Modoc hunt or gather supplies. Food was becoming a concern. They had some dried meat and gathered plants, but feeding 8 people required more than the meager stores they'd managed to accumulate. Joseph and Red Crow decided to risk a hunting expedition despite the weather. "Be careful," Sarah urged as Joseph prepared to leave. "Patterson might have men watching the deer trails. We'll go higher, where white men fear to trek." Joseph assured her, the sheep paths above the tree line. Dangerous, but less likely to encounter trouble. They were gone 3 days. 3 days of Sarah pacing the cave, starting at every sound, imagining all the ways things could go wrong. Blue Feather tried to distract her with lessons, but concentration was impossible. When the hunting party finally returned, they brought troubling news along with fresh meat. They'd seen cavalry patrols on the lower slopes, methodically searching every valley and canyon. Worse, they'd encountered a Mexican sheep herder who warned them that Patterson had hired Paiute trackers, enemies of the Modoc who knew the mountains almost as well. "We need to move again," Uncle Elijah decided. "Deeper into the mountains, maybe across the border into California. I have cousins there who might shelter us." But that night, as they prepared for another dangerous journey, one of the sentries whistled a warning. Riders approaching, but not from below. From above. picking their way down paths that should have been known only to the Modoc. Everyone grabbed weapons, preparing for the worst. Sarah clutched the knife Bluefeather had given her, determined to fight rather than be taken. But as the riders came into view, Uncle Elijah lowered his rifle with a surprised exclamation. "John Branson, is that you?" The lead rider pushed back his hood, revealing a weathered white face and graying beard. "Hello, Elijah. Been a long time." Sarah recognized the name. Branson was the teacher Joseph had mentioned, the one who had lived among the Modoc years ago. Behind him rode two other men, one clearly Mexican and another who might have been half Indian. "Why have you come?" Uncle Elijah asked, wariness clear in his voice. "The reward money?" Branson snorted. "If I wanted blood money, would I announce myself? No, old friend, I come with a proposition, a way out of this mess that might save everyone." They brought the visitors into the cave, weapons still close at hand. Branson accepted coffee gratefully, his companions remaining silent but alert. "I heard what happened in Cedar Ridge," Branson began. "The whole territory's talking about it. The attempted murder, the rescue, the girl who chose Indians over her own kind." He looked at Sarah with keen eyes. "You've caused quite a stir." "Young lady." "I didn't choose to be thrown in quicksand," Sarah replied sharply. "No, but you chose love over safety, and that's almost as dangerous in these parts." Branson sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Here's the thing. Patterson's got the law on his side now. Claims you were kidnapped, that the Modoc are holding you against your will. The cavalry believes him because it's easier than admitting white men tried to murder a white woman." "So we know this," Uncle Elijah said impatiently. "What's your proposition?" Branson smiled. "What if Sarah Bennett died?" The cave fell silent except for the crackling fire. Joseph's hand moved instinctively to his knife, but Branson held up a peaceful hand. "Hear me out. Sarah Bennett, the white farm girl, tragically drowned in quicksand after being kidnapped by Indians. Body never recovered. Quicksand doesn't give up its dead easily. Meanwhile, a Mexican woman named Rosa Morales joins a wagon train heading to Oregon. She's got papers, I can arrange those, and a tragic story of her own. Husband killed by bandits, seeking a new life far from sad memories. I don't look Mexican," Sarah pointed out. "Half Mexican, then Spanish father, Indian mother. It explains the features, the coloring once your hair's dark. More importantly, it puts you in a different category. Patterson's not looking for a Mexican woman. The cavalry won't chase into Oregon territory for someone who isn't even there." "And Joseph?" Sarah asked. "I won't leave without him." "Oh, plenty of Indians in Oregon," Branson said. "Different tribes, different treaties. A Modoc man and his Mexican wife wouldn't raise eyebrows there like they do here." Uncle Elijah was frowning thoughtfully. "This could work, but why help us? What's your gain?" Branson's face grew serious. "I spent 2 years living with your people, Elijah, learning your language, your stories. You treated me with more kindness than my own kind often did. When I heard what those bastards tried to do to this girl, what they planned to do to you for saving her, let's just say my conscience wouldn't let me stand by." The discussion went late into the night, examining the plan from every angle. There were risks, many of them, but it offered something their current situation didn't: hope for a future that didn't involve running and hiding forever. "I'll need to return to the valley," Sarah said finally, "to leave some sign that I died, something to make them stop looking." "Too dangerous," Joseph said immediately. "No, she's right," Uncle Elijah said slowly. "If they believe she's dead, the hunt ends, but it would have to be convincing." "Her dress," Bluefeather suggested. "The one she wore that day. Leave it by the quicksand, torn and bloody. Let them think she escaped but died trying to cross the swamp at night. It was dangerous, but it could work." They spent the rest of the night planning, and by dawn, they had a strategy. It would require all their courage and not a little luck, but it offered something precious, a chance at a life together, free from the hatred that had nearly destroyed them. As the sun rose over the mountains, painting the peaks gold and rose, Sarah stood at the cave entrance beside Joseph, somewhere below. Patterson and his men continued their relentless search. But up here, in this moment, there was peace and possibility. "Are you ready for this?" Joseph asked. To leave Sarah Bennett behind forever? Sarah thought of the girl she'd been. Dutiful daughter, proper Christian, trapped by expectations and rules she'd never questioned until love showed her a different way. That girl had died in the quicksand, whether her body had or not. "She's already gone," Sarah said quietly. "I'm ready to see who I become next." Joseph took her hand, and together they watched the sun climb higher, chasing shadows from the valleys below. In 2 days, they would begin the dangerous journey to make Sarah Bennett disappear and Rosa Morales take her place. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing about their love had been easy. But as Sarah had learned, the best things in life rarely were. The firelight cast dancing shadows on the cave walls as Joseph began to speak, his voice low and heavy with memories. Sarah had asked about his past many times before, but he'd always deflected, offering only fragments. Tonight, perhaps sensing they stood at a crossroads, he finally opened the door to his history. "I was 12 when the soldiers came," he began, staring into the flames. "It was autumn, the time of gathering acorns and preparing for winter. My father had taken me hunting in the high country, my first real hunt as a man-child. We were gone 3 days. His hands clenched and unclenched rhythmically, as if grasping for something lost. When we returned, the village was different, silent, no smoke from cooking fires, no children playing, no women singing at their work. My father knew immediately. He tried to turn me away, but I had already seen." Sarah reached for his hand, but he pulled back, lost in the telling. "Bodies everywhere. My mother by the grinding stones, still clutching the pestle. My sister near the creek. Water jugs scattered around her. The soldiers had come at dawn. They said later. Claimed our people had stolen horses, though we had our own herds. They wanted to teach us a lesson." "How many?" Sarah whispered. 43 dead, more than half our village. The old ones, the women, the children, they didn't discriminate. My youngest brother was 5 winters old. They shot him as he ran from our lodge." Joseph's voice broke slightly. "I found him behind the woodpile. He was clutching the toy horse I'd carved for him." Uncle Elijah, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "It was the Washita Massacre of '68. Not as famous as Sand Creek, but just as brutal. The army called it a battle, but there were no warriors there to fight. They'd all gone to council with other bands. My father went mad with grief." Joseph continued. "He wanted immediate revenge, to die fighting, but the survivors held him back. We fled instead, joined other bands, became the hostiles they claimed we were. For 3 years, we fought and ran and fought again. I learned to kill before I learned to court a woman. Learned to hate before I learned to love." "What changed?" Sarah asked softly. "My father died," Joseph said simply. "Not in battle as he'd wanted, but of sickness. The running, the poor food, the constant fear. It broke his body. As he lay dying, he made me promise not to let hatred consume me as it had him. Learn their ways," he said. "Not to become them, but to survive them. Keep our people alive, even if it means swallowing pride." He finally looked at Sarah, his dark eyes reflecting years of pain. "So I learned English from missionaries, learned to read their books, understand their laws. Some called me a traitor, said I was becoming white, but I remembered my father's words. Survival sometimes means adapting. The teacher, Branson, he helped," Uncle Elijah added. "Came to our camp one winter, half dead from cold. We could have killed him, taken his supplies. Instead, Joseph convinced us to help him. In return, he taught our young ones, helped us understand the white world's ways. Not that understanding helped much," Joseph said bitterly. "We still lost land, still got pushed onto smaller and smaller reservations, still watched our children taken to schools where they beat the Indian out of them. But at least we survived. Some bands didn't." Sarah absorbed this history, understanding now the depth of what Joseph and his people had risked for her. They'd had every reason to let her die, to avoid bringing more trouble on themselves. Yet they'd chosen compassion over safety. "The warriors who came with you," she said, "they lost people too?" "Every one of them," Uncle Elijah confirmed. Red Crow's entire family died of smallpox from infected blankets. Standing Bear's wife was killed by settlers who claimed she was stealing, though she was gathering herbs on land that had been ours for generations. Each man who rode to save you had reasons to hate your people. Yet they came. "Why?" Sarah asked, though she thought she knew. "Because," Joseph said quietly, "my father was right. Hatred consumes. It burns everything it touches, leaves only ash. We've seen what hatred does. It's what brought you to that quicksand pool. We chose differently, chose to be better than those who tried to destroy us." Bluefeather, who rarely spoke of such things, suddenly added her voice. "My husband's first wife was white, captured as a child, raised Modoc. When the soldiers came to rescue her, she begged to stay. She had children, a life, love. They took her anyway, said she was corrupted. She died trying to return to us, shot as a deserter from the white world she'd never known. That's why some were willing to help you," Joseph explained. "They saw Margaret in you, a woman choosing love over the world's expectations, choosing truth over the lies that say we cannot bridge our differences." Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. "I'm not brave like that. I was just a farm girl who fell in love. I didn't mean to cause all this trouble." "Bravery isn't about meaning to be brave," Uncle Elijah said gently. "It's about choosing right when wrong is easier. You could have denied knowing Joseph, could have let them believe you were his victim. Instead, you spoke truth. That takes courage." "And now," Sarah asked, "this plan of Branson's, will it work?" "It has to," Joseph said firmly. "Too much blood has been spilled over hatred. If we can build a life together, prove that love can exist between our peoples, maybe others will see it's possible. Maybe my sister's children won't have to choose between worlds." They sat in contemplative silence for a while, the fire burning low. Outside, a wolf howled, its cry echoing off the mountain peaks. It was a lonely sound, but also defiant, a declaration of survival against all odds. "Tell me about Oregon," Sarah finally said. "What kind of life could we have there?" Joseph's face softened. "Different from here. The tribes there have different treaties, different relationships with settlers. A Modoc man married to a Mexican woman wouldn't draw the same attention. We could have land, raise horses maybe, children who wouldn't have to hide who they are." "Children," Sarah repeated, wondering at the word. "Your children, our children. If the spirits bless us." Joseph agreed. Though they'd face challenges, mixed-blood children always do. Too Indian for some, too white for others. But they'd be raised with love, knowing both worlds. "Like you know both worlds," Sarah said. "That's a strength, not a weakness." Red Crow entered the cave, shaking rain from his hair. "The weather's getting worse. If we're going to move with Branson's plan, it needs to be soon. The passes will be snow-blocked within the week." The reminder of urgency brought them back to the present. They had one chance to make Sarah Bennett disappear convincingly. One chance to start fresh. The margin for error was non-existent. "We'll need to split up," Uncle Elijah strategized. "Some create a false trail leading south, make them think we're fleeing to Mexico. Others help stage the death by the quicksand. Joseph and Sarah head north with Branson to meet the wagon train." "I won't leave you all to face danger while I run," Sarah protested. "You're not running," Bluefeather said firmly. "You're surviving, living well, living free. That's the best revenge against those who tried to kill you. Besides," she added with a rare smile, "someone needs to carry our stories forward. The white world writes history. Make sure our truth gets told too." Sarah understood then that she wasn't just saving herself. She was carrying the hopes of people who'd lost so much, who saw in her love with Joseph a possibility for a different future. The weight of that responsibility was heavy, but also strengthening. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow night," Branson said. entering with his quiet companions. "I've got the papers prepared. Rosa Morales, widow, age 22. Husband killed by bandits near Tucson. Traveling to Oregon to start over with distant cousins. It's common enough to be believed. Tragic enough to discourage questions." He handed Sarah a worn leather folder. Inside were documents that looked official, complete with stamps and signatures. A whole fictional life reduced to paper and ink. "Your Spanish needs work," Branson continued. "Miguel here will help." He indicated the Mexican man who'd remained silent. "You need to speak English with the right accent. Know enough Spanish phrases to be convincing." "Sí, señora," Miguel said with a gentle smile. "We make you proper Mexican lady. It's not so hard. Many peoples in Mexico have mixed blood, Indian, Spanish, even some African. Your appearance, it will not seem strange." The rest of the night was spent in preparation. Sarah practiced her accent, learned her fictional history, memorized details about places she'd never been. Joseph worked with the warriors on the false trail, planning every detail of the deception. As dawn approached, exhaustion forced them to rest. Sarah lay beside Joseph one last time in the cave that had been their sanctuary. Tomorrow would begin a journey that would either free them or destroy them. "Are you afraid?" she whispered. "Terrified," he admitted. "Not of death. I faced that before. But of losing you, of failing you. You could never fail me," Sarah said fiercely. "You pulled me from death. Everything else is just life, and we'll face it together." Joseph pulled her close, and they held each other as the sky lightened outside their mountain refuge. Below in the valleys, their enemies searched. But here, in this moment, they had each other and the promise of tomorrow. "My mother used to say," Joseph murmured, "that the strongest trees are those that grow in the hardest ground. They sink their roots deep, bend but don't break in the wind. We're like those trees. Sarah, the hatred tried to tear us apart, but it only made our roots go deeper." Sarah thought of her parents, probably believing her dead by now. She wished she could tell them she was alive, that she was happy despite everything, but that door was closed forever. Rosa Morales had no family in Cedar Ridge. "Tell me again about the horses," she said, needing to hear something hopeful. Joseph smiled slightly. "Appaloosas, the spotted horses of the Nez Perce. I learned their breeding from a cousin. In Oregon, we could start a small herd. They're prized for their endurance and intelligence. Like us, they're survivors." "Survivors," Sarah repeated. "Yes, that's what we are. What we'll continue to be." Outside, the sun crept over the peaks, painting the world in shades of gold and possibility. In 12 hours, they would begin the performance of their lives, making the world believe Sarah Bennett had died while Rosa Morales began to live. It was a desperate gamble, but as Sarah had learned, sometimes the only choice was to bet everything on love and hope for the best. The Quicksand had tried to claim her body, hatred had tried to claim her spirit, but love, stubborn, impossible, defiant love had pulled her free. Now she just had to keep moving forward, one step at a time, until they reached a place where their love could exist in the light instead of hiding in mountain caves. Oregon seemed impossibly far away. But then again, so had survival once seemed when she was sinking in that pool. Joseph had pulled her out then. Together. They'd pull themselves out of this larger trap, or die trying. There were no other options left, and perhaps that was its own kind of freedom. When you've lost everything except each other, the path forward becomes remarkably clear. Hold on tight and never let go. The narrow canyon pressed in from both sides, its red rock walls rising like prison bars against the evening sky. Sarah and Joseph had been trapped here for 2 days. The main passage blocked by Patterson's men while scouts circled above, waiting for them to make a desperate break. Their food was gone, water running dangerously low, and the noose was tightening with each passing hour. "They've lit fires at both ends," Red Crow reported, sliding down from his reconnaissance. "The smoke will force us out by dawn." Sarah crouched against the canyon wall, her Mexican disguise now dust-covered and torn from their flight. The wagon train plan had fallen apart when Patterson's Paiute trackers had picked up their trail just 2 days into the journey. Since then, it had been a running battle through increasingly hostile terrain. "How many?" Joseph asked, checking his rifle for the 100th time. 30, maybe more. Soldiers from Fort Klamath joined them this morning." Red Crow's face was grim. "They have a Gatling gun?" A Gatling gun. Sarah's heart sank. She'd heard of the devastating weapons, how they could cut down a dozen men in seconds. Against such firepower, their small band had no chance. Uncle Elijah sat studying the canyon walls, his weathered face unreadable. Of their original group, only 5 warriors remained. Standing Bear had fallen to a sniper's bullet 3 days ago. 2 others had led the false trail south, their fate unknown. "There is another way," the elder said finally. "The old path, but what?" Joseph demanded. "It requires climbing, straight up the canyon wall, then across the face to where it joins the next valley. In daylight, with ropes. It would be dangerous. At night, with enemies waiting," he shrugged eloquently. "Certain death versus probable death." Blue Feather observed she'd refused to leave when they'd split the group, insisting Sarah still needed teaching. "I know which I choose." Sarah studied the cliff face in the dying light. It was nearly vertical, with only the barest handholds visible. One slip would mean a fatal fall, but staying meant smoke and bullets and that terrible Gatling gun. "I can do it," she said quietly. "I've gotten stronger. I can do it." Joseph pulled her aside, his face anguished. "Sarah, no, you don't understand. The old path. Even experienced climbers have died attempting it. In the dark. In the dark. They won't see us until it's too late." Sarah interrupted. "Joseph, we're out of options. This is our chance." A rifle shot cracked through the canyon, the bullet sparking off rock near Red Crow's head. The young warrior returned fire, but they all knew ammunition was running low. Soon they'd be down to knives against guns. "We go tonight," Uncle Elijah decided. "Midnight, when the moon sets, complete darkness is our only advantage." They spent the remaining daylight preparing. Ropes were checked and rechecked. Soft leather was wrapped around hands for better grip. Everything that might clink or rattle was secured or discarded. Joseph showed Sarah how to feel for handholds, how to test each grip before committing her weight. "Fear is your enemy," he told her. "More than the height, more than the dark. Fear makes you freeze, makes you grab too tight or not tight enough. Breathe through it. Trust your body." As darkness fell, the smoke began to thicken. Patterson's men were burning green wood, creating maximum smoke to flood the canyon. Sarah's eyes watered, and coughs were hastily muffled. They could hear voices echoing off the walls, taunting calls meant to provoke response. "Come on out, Indian lover," Morrison's voice carried clearly. "Make it easy on yourself. Patterson promises a quick death if you surrender. Keep running, and well, the boys have been away from civilization a long time. Might not be so gentle." Sarah's jaw clenched at the implications, but she said nothing. Let them waste breath on threats. She had climbing to prepare for. Midnight came too soon. The moon slipped behind the western peaks, plunging the canyon into absolute darkness. Uncle Elijah led the way, moving by touch and memory alone. Sarah followed Joseph, with Blue Feather behind her and Red Crow bringing up the rear. The first 50 feet were merely difficult. Handholds were plentiful, the angles steep but manageable. Sarah's months of hard living had given her strength she'd never possessed as a farm girl. Her fingers, once soft, were now calloused and strong. Then the real climb began. The rock face went vertical, then past vertical, requiring them to hang by their fingers while feet searched for tiny ledges. Sarah's world shrank to the few inches in front of her face. Feel for a hold. Test it. Shift weight. Repeat. Don't think about the drop below. Don't think about the armed men waiting. Just climb. Her arms began to burn. Sweat, despite the cold night air, ran into her eyes. Several times, rocks crumbled under her grip, forcing desperate lunges for new holds. Behind her, She heard Blue Feather's harsh breathing, the occasional Modoc curse when a foothold proved false. They were perhaps halfway up when disaster struck. Red Crow, reaching for a hold, put his weight on a loose section of rock. With a grinding noise that seemed impossibly loud, a section of cliff face gave way. Sarah heard his sharp intake of breath, the scramble of hands on stone, then Blue Feather's scream as Red Crow's falling body struck her. The rope between them went taut, nearly pulling Joseph off the wall. "Cut the rope!" Uncle Elijah hissed from above. It was harsh but necessary. Red Crow was already gone, and his weight would drag them all down, but Blue Feather was still conscious, clinging desperately with one hand while Red Crow's weight threatened to tear her loose. In the darkness, Sarah could hear her labored breathing, the scrape of her feet seeking purchase. "I've got you," Sarah said, making a decision that went against every instinct of self-preservation. She locked one arm around a solid rock projection and reached down with the other, finding Blue Feather's wrist. "Joseph, hold my legs." What followed was a nightmare of strain and desperate strength. Sarah pulled with everything she had while Blue Feather used her free hand to cut Red Crow's rope. The young warrior's body fell away into darkness, no sound marking where he hit. One more life sacrificed for their freedom. Blue Feather managed to regain her holds, whispering fierce thanks in Modoc. They resumed climbing, but the pause had cost them. Dawn was breaking by the time they reached the traverse, a narrow ledge running across the cliff face to where the canyon walls broke open into the next valley. And in that growing light, a shout went up from below. They'd been spotted. "Move!" Uncle Elijah commanded, abandoning stealth for speed. Rifle fire erupted from the canyon floor. Bullets whined off the rocks, showering them with sharp fragments. The ledge was barely 8 inches wide, requiring them to press against the cliff face while shuffling sideways. Sarah had made it halfway across when a bullet struck the rock inches from her face. Stone shards cut her cheek, blood running warm down her neck. She froze, vertigo suddenly overwhelming her. The drop yawned below, and for a moment she was back at the quicksand, sinking, drowning. "Sarah!" Joseph's voice cut through her panic. "Look at me, only at me." She turned her head, meeting his dark eyes. In them, she saw not fear but absolute faith. Faith in her strength, in their love, in their ability to survive this. "That's it," he encouraged as she began moving again. One step, another. "We're almost there." More shots. Closer now. The soldiers had found an angle that gave them better targeting. Uncle Elijah grunted as a bullet creased his shoulder but kept moving. They were so close, 20 feet from where the ledge widened and they could drop into the next valley. Then Sarah heard a sound that made her blood freeze, the mechanical cranking of the Gatling gun being positioned. "Jump!" Uncle Elijah roared. They had no choice. As the Gatling gun opened up, filling the air with a deadly hail of bullets, they threw themselves off the ledge toward the slope below. Sarah had a moment of weightlessness, Joseph's hand finding hers in midair. Then they hit the scree slope hard. They rolled and slid in a chaos of loose rock and dust, the Gatling gun's bullets striking all around them like deadly rain. Sarah lost Joseph's hand, lost all sense of direction, just tucked her head and let gravity take her. When she finally came to rest, bruised and bleeding but miraculously alive, she was in a grove of pinon pines. Joseph lay nearby, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. Uncle Elijah was struggling to stand, blood soaking his shirt. Of Blue Feather, there was no sign. "Can you walk?" Joseph asked through gritted teeth. Sarah tested her limbs. Everything hurt, but nothing seemed broken. "Yes, but your leg." "We'll have to wait." He used his rifle as a crutch, levering himself upright. "They'll be coming around the long way. We have maybe an hour." Uncle Elijah had found Blue Feather. She was unconscious but breathing, a deep gash on her head. Together, Sarah and the elder fashioned a travois from pine branches and their remaining rope. They fled into the forest, every step agony for Joseph, every breath a struggle for Uncle Elijah. Behind them, They could hear pursuit horses, dogs, the shouts of trackers who sensed their quarry was finally weakening. The forest gave way to a meadow, and Sarah's heart sank. Open ground. No cover. They'd be picked off easily here. There, Uncle Elijah pointed with a trembling hand. The rocks. A jumble of boulders rose from the meadow's far side. Not much, but better than nothing. They struggled toward it, Sarah supporting Joseph while Uncle Elijah dragged Blue Feather. They had barely reached the rocks when the first riders appeared at the forest edge. "This is where we stand," Uncle Elijah said quietly. "No more running." They had perhaps 10 bullets left between them. Joseph, despite his broken leg, propped himself against a boulder and checked his rifle. Sarah held Blue Feather's head in her lap, the woman stirring but not yet conscious. The riders spread out, surrounding the rocks. Sarah counted 20, with more emerging from the forest. Patterson rode at their head, his face triumphant. "It's over," he called. "Surrender the woman, and we might let the rest of you live." "Come and take her," Joseph replied, sighting down his rifle. Patterson laughed, still defiant. "Look around you, savage. You're outnumbered, outgunned, out of options. That woman belongs to us, to justice. Your justice tried to drown me." Sarah called out, finding strength in her anger. "I reject it. I reject you. I choose my own path." "Then you choose death," Patterson said coldly. He raised his hand to signal the attack, but before he could drop it, a new sound split the air war cries from the forest. Dozens of voices raised in challenge. Modoc warriors poured from the trees. But not just Modoc. Sarah saw Shoshone, Paiute, even some Klamath traditional enemies united by a common cause. Branson rode with them, and beside him, impossibly, Dan Sullivan and the Watson brothers. They'd switched sides, brought reinforcements, turned the trap into a rescue. The battle was fierce but brief. Patterson's men, caught between the rocks and the charging warriors, scattered. Some fled immediately. Others tried to fight but were quickly overwhelmed. The Gatling gun, so fearsome in the canyon, was useless in a close-quarters cavalry charge. Patterson himself tried to flee but was cut off by Sullivan. The two men faced each other. Patterson's face twisted with rage and betrayal. "You dare side with savages?" Patterson snarled. "I side with justice." Sullivan replied steadily. "Real justice. You tried to murder an innocent woman. Jake, that's not the man I thought you were, not the town I want to live in." Patterson went for his gun. But Sullivan was faster. The wealthy rancher toppled from his saddle, clutching his shoulder where Sullivan's bullet had found its mark. Not a killing shot. Sullivan wasn't a killer, but enough to end the threat. As the dust settled, Sarah found herself surrounded by unlikely allies. Warriors who had every reason to hate her kind. White men who'd found their conscience. All united by the simple recognition that love shouldn't be a death sentence. "The army will come," Uncle Elijah warned, accepting medical help from a Shoshone healer. "This isn't over." "No," Branson agreed. "But it's a start. Public opinion is shifting. There are newspapermen in San Francisco writing about what happened here, politicians in Washington questioning the Army's methods. Change is slow, but it's coming." Joseph, his legs splinted and wrapped, pulled Sarah close. "We still need to disappear for a while. Let things calm down." "Oregon?" Sarah asked. "Eventually. But first," he smiled despite his pain. "The Shoshone have offered us shelter. Their reservation has different rules, different protections. We can rest, heal, plan properly." Sarah looked around at the mixed group, red and white. Traditional enemies, now tentative allies. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined, wasn't a clean victory, but it was survival. It was hope. "Blue Feather?" she asked anxiously. "We'll live," the healer announced. "Scarred, but living, like all of us." As they prepared to move out, Sarah took one last look at the battlefield. Blood soaked the meadow grass. Bodies lay still. The cost of hatred was written clearly for all to see, but so was the power of choice. Each person here had chosen to stand against injustice. Some, like Sullivan, had overcome their own prejudice. Others, like the warriors, had risked everything for someone their world said was an enemy. "No more hiding," Sarah said quietly to Joseph. "Whatever comes next, we face it together, in the open." He squeezed her hand. "Together," he agreed. They rode out of the meadow as the sun climbed higher, a strange procession of former enemies now bound by shared purpose. Behind them, Patterson nursed his wounded shoulder and his shattered pride, his reign of terror broken. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. The world was changing, slowly, painfully, but changing nonetheless. And in that change, perhaps there was room for a love that transcended the artificial boundaries humans drew between themselves. Sarah Bennett was truly dead now, drowned in quicksand and battle alike. But from her death had risen something new, a woman without a nation but with a purpose, a bridge between worlds that desperately needed bridging. The quicksand had failed to swallow her. Hatred had failed to destroy her. Now came the harder task, living the life she'd fought so hard to claim, and proving that love could indeed conquer all. Even in the American West of 1876, miracles were possible. You just had to be willing to fight for them, climb impossible cliffs for them, and sometimes trust that others would join your cause when it mattered most. The courtroom in Salem was packed to overflowing, spectators spilling out into the hallways of the newly built courthouse. It had been 6 months since the battle at the meadow, and what had started as a local incident had captured the attention of the entire nation. Newspaper correspondents from San Francisco, Chicago, and even New York filled the press gallery, their pencils racing across notepads. Sarah sat at the defendant's table, no longer trying to hide her identity. Her hair had grown out to its natural color, and she wore a simple but respectable dress that Blue Feather had helped her make. Beside her sat Joseph, his leg fully healed, dressed in a combination of traditional and American clothing that somehow suited him perfectly. The charges were numerous: inciting violence, fleeing custody, consorting with hostiles, and a dozen other accusations that essentially boiled down to the crime of choosing love over racial expectations. But public opinion had shifted dramatically since the true story had emerged. Dan Sullivan's testimony, published in newspapers across the country, had painted a vivid picture of the attempted murder at the Quicksand pool. The Watson brothers had corroborated every detail. "The defense calls Miss Sarah Bennett to the stand," announced their lawyer, a young idealist named Theodore Hawthorne who had taken the case for free, seeing it as a chance to make history. Sarah rose, her hand briefly touching Joseph's for strength, and walked to the witness stand. The bailiff approached with a Bible, and she placed her hand on it without hesitation. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Sarah said clearly. Theodore began gently, establishing the facts of her life in Cedar Ridge, her family's struggles, her character as known by the community. Then came the harder questions. "Miss Bennett, please tell the court about the day you first met Joseph Winnemucca." Sarah's voice was steady as she recounted the charging horse, Joseph's intervention, their first conversation by the stream. She spoke of their growing friendship, the books shared, the lessons in plant lore that had saved her brother's life. "And did you, at any point, feel coerced or threatened by Mr. Winnemucca?" "Never," Sarah said firmly. "He was unfailingly gentle and respectful, more so than many men I'd known in town." A murmur ran through the crowd at this, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. "Now," Theodore continued, "please tell us about the day of March 15th, 1876. Sarah's voice caught slightly, but she pressed on. She described the ambush, the ride to the quicksand, the horror of being pushed toward death while bound and helpless. Several women in the gallery wept openly as she recounted sinking into the mire, believing her life was over. "And then," Theodore prompted gently. "And then Joseph came," Sarah said, looking directly at where Patterson sat in the plaintiff's section, his arm still weak from his wound. "He risked his life to pull me from certain death, While the men who pushed me there watched and did nothing, Joseph and his brothers saved me. The prosecutor, a stern man named Cornelius Blackstone, rose for cross-examination. His strategy was predictable. Paint Sarah as a confused woman led astray, perhaps not responsible for her actions, but certainly in need of protection from herself. "Miss Bennett," he began smoothly, "you've been through a terrible ordeal. Is it possible that your attachment to Mr. Winnemucca is born of gratitude rather than genuine feeling?" "Mr. Blackstone," Sarah replied, "I knew my own heart long before that day at the Quicksand. What happened there only confirmed what I already knew, that Joseph is the finest man I've ever known, regardless of the color of his skin. But surely you understand the natural order of things? The differences between the races?" Sarah's chin lifted. "I understand that the only difference that matters is between those who choose love and those who choose hate, between those who save lives and those who try to take them." The trial continued for 3 days. Witness after witness took the stand, Bluefeather speaking eloquently about Sarah's transformation and dedication. Uncle Elijah describing the rescue and its aftermath. Even some townspeople from Cedar Ridge admitting they'd been wrong about Joseph and his people. The most dramatic moment came when Dan Sullivan took the stand, once Patterson's right-hand man. He now sat as a witness for the defense, his face grave with the weight of his testimony. "I was there," he said simply. "I helped tie her hands. I watched Jake push her toward that quicksand, and I did nothing to stop it." His voice broke. "I'll carry that shame for the rest of my life. But I'll not add to it by lying now. What we did was attempted murder, plain and simple. What Joseph Winnemucca did was heroism." Patterson's face was purple with rage, but his own lawyer kept him from speaking out. The damage was done. The narrative Patterson had tried to spin of savage Indians kidnapping an innocent white woman crumbled in the face of eyewitness testimony. On the morning of the 4th day, the jury retired to deliberate. Sarah and Joseph waited in a small room, surrounded by supporters both Indian and white. Branson was there, steady as always. The Watson brothers, seeking redemption through action. Even a delegation from the Shoshone Reservation, come to stand witness. "Whatever happens," Joseph said quietly, "we've spoken our truth. That matters." "It's not enough," Sarah replied. "Truth should lead to justice." The jury was out for only 2 hours. When they filed back in, Sarah searched their faces for some sign of the verdict. The foreman, a weathered farmer named Josiah Mills, stood at the judge's request. "In the matter of the charges against Sarah Bennett and Joseph Winnemucca, how do you find—" Mills cleared his throat. "Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor, and if it were in our power, we'd charge some others with attempted murder." The courtroom erupted. Cheers from the gallery, shouts of protest from Patterson supporters. The judge's gavel banging repeatedly for order. Sarah turned to Joseph, tears streaming down her face, and embraced him fully in public for the first time. "Order," Judge Harrison commanded. When quiet was restored, he continued, "The defendants are free to go, and Mr. Patterson." He looked directly at the rancher. "You should consider yourself fortunate that Miss Bennett chose not to press charges against you. Were it my choice, you'd be facing trial yourself." Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. But instead of the angry mob Sarah had feared, it was a mixture of supporters and the simply curious. Reporters pushed forward with questions, and Theodore guided Sarah and Joseph to a spot where they could speak. "Miss Bennett, what are your plans now?" a reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle asked. Sarah looked at Joseph, then back at the crowd. "We plan to live, to build a life together, to raise horses and perhaps children who will grow up in a world where love isn't limited by the color of one's skin." "And where will you do this?" another reporter called out. "Oregon." Joseph answered, "There's land there, good land for horses, and communities that judge a man by his actions, not his ancestry." As they made their way through the crowd, Sarah was surprised by how many reached out to shake their hands or offer words of support. Not everyone. There were still hard faces, muttered curses, but enough to give hope. That evening, at a celebration in Branson's home, Sarah found a moment of quiet with Bluefeather, who had recovered from her injuries, though she now bore a scar across her forehead. "You've won a great victory," Bluefeather said. "Not just for yourself, but for all who come after. It doesn't feel like victory." Sarah admitted, "Red Crow is dead, Standing Bear, others whose names I never knew. The price was so high." "The price of change always is," Bluefeather replied. "But consider today, in a white man's court, justice was done. A white jury said that an Indian's life has value, that love between our peoples is not a crime. That has never happened before." Later, as Sarah and Joseph prepared for the journey to Oregon, Uncle Elijah performed a traditional blessing ceremony. Warriors from multiple tribes attended, as did Sullivan, the Watson brothers, and others from the white community who had found the courage to stand against prejudice. "You carry our hopes with you," Uncle Elijah said. "Live well. Live freely. Show the world what is possible when we choose love over fear." The journey to Oregon was almost anticlimactic after everything they'd been through. They traveled with a group of progressive-minded settlers, people who had read about the trial and wanted to be part of building a different kind of community. There were still moments of tension, suspicious looks in some towns, but also unexpected kindnesses. They found their land in the Willamette Valley, 160 acres of good pasture with a clear stream running through it. The previous owner, an elderly German immigrant, sold it to them for a fair price, saying, "I came here to escape the old country's hatred. I'll not bring it to the new world." Building their home was a community effort. Neighbors came to help raise the barn, sharing food and stories. Sarah was surprised to find herself welcomed by the local women, who were more interested in her recipes and gardening knowledge than the color of her husband's skin. Joseph's skill with horses quickly earned respect. Within a year, their small herd of Appaloosas was thriving, and ranchers came from miles around to negotiate for foals. The horses, with their spotted coats and gentle temperaments, seemed to embody the blending of different elements into something beautiful and strong. 2 years after the trial, as Sarah stood in the doorway of their completed house, she held their infant daughter, little Mary, named for Sarah's mother, with Joseph's dark eyes and Sarah's determined chin. Joseph worked in the corral with their yearlings, his movements sure and graceful. "Your papa's teaching them to trust," Sarah whispered to Mary, "just like he taught me." A rider approached, Tommy Watson, now a young man, come to work the summer on their ranch as he did each year, still seeking to atone for his family's actions. He waved cheerfully, and Joseph waved back, their easy friendship a testament to the possibility of redemption. As the sun set over the valley, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the Quicksand pool to this moment of peace had been a path marked by pain, loss, and struggle, but also by love, courage, and the gradual, painful birth of a better world. Patterson still lived in Cedar Ridge. They heard a bitter and broken man who had lost everything to his hatred. Morrison had drunk himself to death within a year of the trial. But Sullivan had become mayor, working to build a town where such injustices could never happen again. "Mama!" Mary's happy gurgle brought Sarah back to the present. Joseph had finished with the horses and was walking toward them, his face lighting up at the sight of his family. "How are my girls?" he asked, wrapping his arms around them both. "Perfect," Sarah replied, leaning into his embrace. "Absolutely perfect," as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Sarah thought of all those who had made this moment possible. Uncle Elijah, still fighting for his people's rights. Bluefeather, now teaching in a reservation school. Red Crow and the others who had given their lives. Even Dan Sullivan and the Watson brothers, who had found the courage to change. Their daughter would grow up in a world still divided by prejudice, but also in a home where love transcended such divisions. She would know both cultures, speak both languages, and perhaps help bridge the gap that had cost so much to cross. "Tell me again about the Quicksand," Joseph said softly. A ritual between them now, "I was thrown to the quicksand pool for loving an Indian," Sarah recited, "until a Modoc risked his life to pull me out. And then," he prompted, "and then we pulled each other out of the bigger quicksand of hatred and fear. Together." Joseph kissed her forehead. "Then Mary's?" "Together," he agreed. In the distance, a coyote called to its pack. And this time the sound didn't seem lonely at all. It sounded like home, like family, like a future bright with possibility. The quicksand had failed to claim them. Love, as it always does when given the chance, had won. The West was still wild, but in this small corner of Oregon, it was also gentle, also kind, also full of the promise that people could choose to be better than their worst impulses. It had taken a near-death experience to teach that lesson. But Sarah wouldn't change any of it. Every scar, every tear, every moment of terror had led to this. A life freely chosen, a love freely given, and a future freely made. As they went inside their home, the lamplight spilling warmly onto the porch, Sarah paused for one last look at the stars. Somewhere up there, she liked to think, Red Crow and Standing Bear watched over them, satisfied that their sacrifice had meaning, and perhaps, in time, their daughter and others like her would live in a world where such sacrifices were no longer necessary. Until then, they would live their lives as proof that love could conquer all, even the quicksand of human hatred. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a true one. And in the Wild West of 1878, sometimes survival itself was the greatest victory of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, courage, and survival in the Wild West. I hope Sarah and Joseph's journey touched your heart as it did mine. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of the American frontier. And let me know your thoughts on this story. Did it move you? What part resonated with you most? Your feedback means everything to me. Until next time, keep believing that love can conquer all.